Hello, everybody. I'm Pasha Marlowe. Welcome back to the Neuroqueering podcast. I've missed you. It's been a little while, and I'm excited to be back today for a new episode. Today, with a new friend and colleague that I found on TikTok, of course, and have so enjoyed getting to know, Mattia Maurée. And Mattia is here talking about neuroqueering. We're going to talk about capitalism. We're going to talk about AuDHD. We're going to talk about probably a lot of things because that's how our brains work, right? we jump all over. Mattia is an AuDHD coach. That's a kind of combination of ADHD and autism, a hypnotherapist, but also a composer and a poet, multi hyphenate artist, and a puffin lover because we can't just be one thing. So, welcome, Mattia.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. Yeah, we just connected recently, and Pasha is also going to be on my podcast soon. So I'm excited to have another conversation in a couple weeks.
Yes, we're going to podcast swap. So, Mattia, you are the host of the AuDHD Flourishing podcast and because again, we can't just do one thing, the Longer Road podcast. I love that you have two podcasts. I had my podcast Let Pleasure Be the Measure, and then when I got to 75 episodes, I was just like, okay, I'm done talking about pleasure now. And then I created this one, the Neuroqueering podcast. So I can resonate with this multi hyphenate person that you are. I love it. I love it.
Yeah. And I love the word neuroqueering as well. It's a word that I use. And actually, when I was starting to, we've already touched on pre-recording that niching is like such a weird thing. But like when I was over the past 4 years, kind of who am I talking to as a coach, right? Like who am I actually enjoying working with the most? I used the word neuroqueer for a while. And then I was also for a while saying like queer and or women. Like I was just kind of like, look, I was like, okay, I don't really want to work with cis men, which actually isn't even the case anymore. I was just kind of like, okay, who do I want to work with? But I love the word neuroqueer because it does touch on two of the groups that I like working with the most, because I'm also non-binary and trans and, queer myself. And so, for example, being able to have a client who is autistic and trans, that's so specific. And if
Yes.
somebody doesn't understand one of those things, it's not that they couldn't be a good practitioner for you, but the way I've described it is there's something so nice about just not having to explain yourself in every facet of your
Absolutely.
identity all the time, right? Not having to spend an hour just catching the person up to speed, just being able to like use terminology, not have it be a big deal. And so that's, I think it can be really helpful to work with somebody who has multiple identities overlapping with you for that reason.
I so agree. And as a neurodivergent and queer person myself, what I'm finding personally and professionally is that often, if I'm not working with a coach or a therapist who's also neurodivergent and queer, whatever I bring to the table, they will see through the lens of that and only through the lens of my neurodivergence and or queerness. And it's so limiting. And I think neuroqueering it even expands beyond neurodivergence and queerness into the verb, into the aspect of queering neuronormativity, queering heteronormativity, queering gender norms, social norms. And then of course, as we've talked about, once you start queering one thing, you're going to diverge and queer other things. And so capitalism and patriarchy and white supremacy and like on and on and on, it just like ripples out. And I feel like I love that the word encompasses and can hold all of that.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, once you start peeling back the layers of even just, okay, I think the way that I think about it, because obviously my particular autistic frame is just like being, and I have a PDA profile as well, persistent drive for autonomy or pathological demand avoidance. Uh, and so I'm naturally not uh, respectful of authority just without
Mhm.
reason. So it's like they can prove to me that they are worth respecting, but I don't, as a baseline, just assume that authority is good or has our best interests in mind or even is, you know, I don't really like using words around intelligence because I'm not, but I don't assume that they know what they're doing. Competence is the word I was looking for. I don't assume that they're competent at what they're
Yes.
doing. Yeah.
Yes.
And once you start questioning that, I think everything just falls apart so fast because you're like, wait, it's just a bunch of random assholes in charge of stuff just because their great grandparents were rich. Like, come on.
Yeah, yeah. And then who made up this word to begin with? Who made up this rule to begin with? Who made up
Yep.
this norm to begin with? Yeah, yeah. And this idea of questioning authority comes up a lot, and it's interesting because you mentioned PDA, and I love how the can you say again the traditional acronym and then the newer more positive, less pathologizing acronym of
Yeah.
PDA.
So if you were if you were diagnosed autistic as a kid, there's a good chance or like a higher chance that you also got this diagnosis, pathological demand avoidance, which
Mhm.
is, it's got pathological right in the title. It's obviously literally being pathologized.
Literally.
And
Like,
then,
we're here
yeah,
pathologizing you. Mhm.
the sort of reclaimed community term to still use the acronym is persistent drive for autonomy. So
So much
basically,
better.
I would like to be in charge of my own body and activities, and if you can't tell me what to do.
Absolutely. And while we're on pathologizing language and more affirming language, I am queer, I am autistic comes out very naturally, but I am ADHD still interest. I want to encompass that. I want to, and sometimes I'll say I'm an autistic ADHD or I'm AuDHD. But isn't it interesting that I'm AuDHD to me feels better than I am ADHD because I'm so against the deficit and disorder aspects in the labeling of ADHD. And the AuDHD is like, hello, like autism's here. And by the way, autism likes to be correct. And this terminology is pathologizing and incorrect.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, same with ASD, right? Which is my actual diagnosis, right? It's got
Yes.
disorder in the title. Yeah, I totally agree. And then interestingly, the other kind of piece that's coming in for me recently is I also got an Ehlers-Danlos diagnosis, which
Mhm.
I knew I was hypermobile for a long time. I've been getting ridiculous injuries since I was a small child. Like I've known that I've had, and I had some other health problems that came along with Ehlers-Danlos as well, but I actually didn't get a diagnosis until recently. And that to me, like having an invisible physical disability or mostly invisible, like unless I'm wearing, a brace of some kind, like I feel so differently about having a physical disability than having, ADHD or autism because I think with the brain stuff, we're trained to just push through it.
Yeah.
And that's true for physical things as well. But I've just been thinking about this because I dislocated my shoulder, I think 2 months ago now, just like completely popped out while I was playing soccer, got it back in, but it was hurting, and it's still getting better. And so I have had really limited physical ability in the last couple months. And this
Mhm.
happens anytime there is big injury. So it's not like I'm used to this. And at the same time, I'm noticing, wow, I'm like so much harder on myself for the physical stuff
Mm.
because it's it feels so limiting, even though, like I've only had a full-time job for 3 years out of the 15 years since I finished undergrad, right? So like it's not like my brain's not affecting my life. But that's another thing I think about with the pathologizing is that the way that physical disability is treated in the US is so just egregiously awful.
I agree.
And another way that I've kind of seen it, like if you look historically, is like, you could be depressed or anxious and just sort of be at home. And it was like kind of sexy for the upper classes to do that, to just be like very frail. But having a physical disability was always much more looked down upon because you couldn't produce. So anyway, it's interesting because technically both of those things make it harder for me to produce, but I noticed that I'm personally having to do a lot more internal ableism work
Yes.
around my body as well.
Interesting. Which leads us to a good conversation about the social model versus medical model. Or do you
Yep.
believe that disability is a social construct?
Fundamentally, yes. And at the same time, like there are things, right? Like if you couldn't, we've only been living in buildings for, couple 10,000 years of any kind. So, there definitely are physical things that make it actually hard to do anything if you're like living outside. And, so in theory, a lot of our social structures should make it a lot easier. for disabled people, but they just
Yes.
weren't built that way, you know,
Right.
for a lot of reasons. Um, and for me, a lot of what that comes down to is the connection between money and power. So not just, right, we talk about, like with capitalism, right, we can talk about money, and then obviously in structures we can talk about power, but I think the way that they come together is why a lot of things developed the way that they did,
Mhm.
which is a
Mhm.
huge, you know, that's a huge conversation, but that's
It
my
is. I know. I know. My brain is doing that spider web thing where it's branching off into
yeah,
so many different directions and I'm trying to figure out which one to grab. But it is very much reminding me of the concept of, functioning labels. And as
yep,
autistics, I'm sure you have heard high functioning and low functioning, and you've probably been diagnosed as high functioning because of your abilities. And so have I, and I have been rejecting the functioning labels
totally.
as we work towards the depathologizing the languaging, and also thinking of creating language around societies being low functioning or high functioning versus
Mm,
people being
right.
high functioning and low
Oh, I
functioning.
like that. Yeah, because American society is deeply low functioning in terms of how it's caring for people, even though we have so many resources. It would be, I actually just ordered the book. Is it Moneyless Society? But that
Mm,
podcast, were you the one that told me about that podcast? Somebody just
mm,
told me about it. Okay.
nope.
Well, I just started listening to the Moneyless Society podcast, and then one of the hosts wrote a book. So I just ordered it. But like, one of the things the podcast and the book are about is this, you know, we have the resources for everyone. They're just so inequitable. And again, this conjunction of money and power being what it is. And I grew up poor. So that's the other weird thing is like I just was never exposed to sort of wealthy culture until I moved to Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, kept being to, you know, people in my social circle, oh, wow, you bought a house here? Like, how'd you do that? And they're like, oh, I have a trust fund. And I'm like, I didn't know trust funds were such a fucking thing, but apparently a lot of people I know have them. Like, this particular little slice of old money is so weird.
Is that part of the artist community
In
or
part, yeah. So I mean, I
awesome?
had like I had a roommate, for example, who I kind of felt like was appropriating poor culture because I
Mm,
found out that the reason they weren't working is because they literally had gone to had gone to school with me and then were living off of the rest of this like trust fund, and they were going to run out, so it wasn't like a endless money forever. But then they were sort of like talking about being poor, and I'm like, you're literally living off of generational wealth and you're
right.
white. Like, I don't know what to tell you. I didn't even have that conversation with the person. I didn't even know how to approach that. But when I found this out, I was just like, oh, so you're like poor. You're talking about being poor because it's cool as an artist and you don't want people to know. And I didn't
Mhm.
like go around telling people or anything. I was just like, wow, that's like,
That's
I did not know
interesting.
that this was a thing to like have family money, be living off family money, and then be telling people that you're poor. Like,
Yes.
what is that?
Yes. And this is touching a nerve, and you and I talked about this prior to recording. I have never been as nervous about making money as I have been in the last couple years. Uh,
Mm,
I've always embraced the idea of, rest is resistance and pleasure and play is important. And I didn't want to buy into capitalism or productivity or the hustle culture. And yet, I am finding, and I'm really, really struggling with this because of the cost of living. I'm up in Maine, just north of Boston. Um, it's becoming unsustainable. And I've been trying to afford my own apartment as I'm divorcing. And I'm finding that even though I work beyond full time, like I hustle way too much, that it's still not possible. And it's frustrating to me that I'm leaning into more than I've ever wanted to, um, working with corporations, kind of following the money, maybe playing the game a little bit more, and trying to making choices about what's profitable, not just what like I'm passionate about all the things that I do, and I feel very personally and professionally aligned to them, thank goodness. But there's some things like podcasting that don't bring in money, and some
and
things
in
like
fact, cost money.
and they do, right. Like it's just I do this for fun. I don't even know if people listen. I don't get business from it. I don't have advertisements or sponsors yet. But when I do a paying public speaking gig or a presentation for a corporation, I get paid. And sometimes I don't feel as aligned with it because, of course, there's the corporate speak and just being in that business space. But I'm choosing to do both because I need to pay the bills and be quote unquote productive and profitable. And I want to do my passion projects and the things that allow me to rest and play and be in pleasure. I don't know, but I've never felt that until the last couple of years. And I think it's a sign of the times and the economy and the housing market. I'm just curious what you feel about that or what you've noticed with yourself or your clients as trends in that.
Yeah, I think about this so much. I actually have a little group of, I think there's 6 of us coach friends that have been just getting together and talking about money every couple weeks, basically, because we're all feeling weird about it. So
Oh,
that's
interesting.
been really lovely. And yeah, I think about this so much because, okay, you brought up like just to kind of lay out the land here. There's the uh, making money from our communities essentially, right? Because we're working as coaches, at least I'm working with people who are like me in certain
Me
ways,
too.
right? So I'm
Mhm.
working with people who are disabled and neurodivergent and queer and trans, right?
Exactly.
All of which are some of the lowest income earning, groups in the
Absolutely.
country. So there's that piece, right? So there's making money from our communities. There's the tying into sort of corporate money or like any other form maybe of, big piles of money sitting there waiting for people to come take it if they know how, which
Mhm.
exist, right?
Mhm.
And then there's the having time to work on passions and like
Yes.
actually making that time. And that last piece, I'll be honest, is what I struggle with the most because my brain struggles with transitions, not just between two tasks, but even like how many different things can I do in a day? How many different things can I do in a week? Like when
Mm.
I'm composing, for example, or writing a large piece of writing or music, my brain needs to be able to focus on that thing for days at a time. And I need rest in there too. It's not
Yeah.
just, I can't just flip it on, be in writing mode for just 3 hours and then just go back to admin work, right? Like that's not how my brain works. And I think
No.
that's not how a lot of creative brains work as well, like especially mine. So, I can do what I can do with like supplements, medication, and, helping my brain do what it can do. And at the same time, I don't I don't want to just create my life for optimal productivity or optimal anything. Honestly, I've come to hate the word optimizing as well, just because I'm like, fuck you. I don't just want to be optimal. Like,
I don't want to be optimal and I don't want to live up
yeah,
to my potential, whatever the fuck that means.
exactly. I hate potential so much. Yeah. So, anyway, so I like looking at all of those things together. One thing that has been working for me is making sure that I'm making enough money so that I can offer, say, scholarship spots in my program, which I'm doing right now, right?
Nice.
And coaching some people for free, which I do because for me, us like, and I do sliding scale as well. So I'm kind of throwing all the things at it and seeing
All
what
the
works.
things,
Yeah.
payment plans and sliding
But
scales. Yes.
even sliding scale, the way somebody described it to me recently is a client described it to me is they were like, I can work with you because I am the working poor, but obviously there are a lot of people who need this who couldn't even afford the bottom of the sliding scale, right?
Yes.
And I know that. And
Yes.
so for me, if I'm going to offer someone like a full, or like say, for example, someone I'm working with for free right now, they are neurodivergent and long term unemployed, and I used to work in recruitment. So I was like, well, I can literally help you fix up your resume, get some job applications out there. Like it's essentially a pretty practical, like we're not doing a lot of mindset stuff. We're just kind of getting in there, fixing up the resume. And there were a lot of things that needed to be fixed. So I was looking at it and I was like explaining as we were going. I was like, here's what people see or think when they see this.
Mhm.
And here's what it needs to
Mhm.
say instead. And here's how you
Mhm.
like clean this up and then turn this into a story for the interview. Right. So like so anyway, that's something where it wouldn't make sense for me to charge that person money in my mind. And that's where I think a lot of the stuff in like the coaching world gets really weird for me is like, oh, just pay me $10,000 and then you'll be able to go make $100,000 next year. And I'm like, what? I mean,
Yes.
maybe that does work for some people, but I think it works mostly if you already have a network that can afford to pay you a lot.
Yes.
So there's just this whole circular cyclical thing. And we joke about it in the queer community too. It's like we're all passing around the same $20 of mutual aid.
Absolutely. A big energy exchange or bartering or
Yep.
yes, yes.
Yep.
Yes. I've done that for 52 years and again, I'm finding only now that it's really uh, challenging.
Yeah.
And so I want to offer the scholarships. I want to offer the sliding scales and the payment plans, and volunteer in my community, offer free presentations to local organizations. And the only way to balance that out feels like tapping into the corporate
Yeah.
America, which I don't want to support all the time. So then here's how I'm getting around it, in case anyone out there, that I'm bringing to them. My presentation is neurodiversity affirming practices and attitudes in the workspace. So I'm like, okay, I'm still serving my community and I'm helping, and I'm, in the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging space. And so I'm still serving my communities and talking about neuroqueering and compassion and disability rights and all the things. But they're paying me. And honestly, this is the first year that this has happened. And I'm glad I'm making that shift, but it's so fascinating what's happening inside my heart, about it. And because I don't have as much time or space in my schedule to offer the one-on-one or the couples appointments, for the community directly. So I love that you have a group that talks about this and probably is very transparent about
Totally.
money, how much you make, how much you charge. That's beautiful, and it
Yeah.
probably takes away a lot of the angst and the shame around it.
Yeah. And makes me feel better about the decisions that I'm making. Right. Because I kind of, for a while, I was feeling like, okay, I'm like the only one over here in this corner, mad about
Mm.
the systems not wanting to charge a bunch of money. And everybody else is like, just keep charging as much as you can. And I was like, I don't want to. And you can't make me because I have PDA. So,
You can't make
but,
me. I love it. I love it.
but the other piece I also want to bring in that I feel like is really important, especially for neurodivergent entrepreneurs to hear and disabled entrepreneurs to hear, is that one of the things people typically don't put forward is the privilege that is allowing them to do what they're doing. So, for example, when I was getting my coaching business started, I was living in an affordable housing unit in Boston. And it was literally, I think we were paying a third of the market rate for that
Mm.
apartment because it was income
Mhm.
based. So it was income
Mm.
based to get in. And then we were allowed to make more in the following year. So I had like a really stable, and then Massachusetts also has great health insurance for, like free state health insurance, basically. Again, that kind of scales up with your income. So I was basically able to, either cobble to have like a part-time job some of the time, with some benefits, and or just be on the state insurance. I had affordable housing. And the other piece right now that I have is that my partner, well, first of all, my partner makes a lot of money. So that's one thing. Like they basically bought the house that we live in, but I am also on the mortgage. So, like we
Yes.
co-own the house, but they basically paid the down payment. So even though, and then they're putting more into the mortgage than I am. So that's like another thing I'm looking at. And I'm like, okay, so, even if, and actually they did almost die last fall in an accident. So that was terrifying, but like,
Ooh.
yeah. So then went into caretaking mode, and when they were in recovery, and I was like, oh, I think I wasn't consciously processing how they are also doing almost all of the housework, literally all of the cooking. Like they do so much caretaking stuff. So I have someone who's taking care of me in like such a deep way, other
Mm.
than, the couple months when they were recovering from emergency surgery. And then I was looking at this and I was just like, wow, okay, so this is almost more the model people were living in, decades or, centuries ago, whereas like you as an artist have someone caring for you, whether that's family or, partner or whatever. Like that's what men did for a big chunk of history, was just had a wife to take care of them. And I kind of have that set up. And I like to be upfront about that with people because it's like the thing that I really, really want us to redefine around what success looks like as an AuDHD person, or just again, any of these other identities, is it's not that you reach a point of, healthiness or brain functioning where you can do all of these simple household tasks and have them be easy. Like that has never happened for me. I've just done a better job of letting people take care of me. And like we hire cleaners, every 6 weeks now or so to just kind of do a top to bottom, like scrub and everything. And like, cause I can't scrub because of my joints. Right. So there's all these things where like, I used to think, okay, functionality means being able to do all of these simple basic things, and then I get to be an artist. And it's like, nope, I just need to eliminate that swath altogether, which is very difficult for most people because most people don't have this level of privilege and support that I have at this moment. So basically, in building my business, I had the affordable housing, and then we moved here and now we own a house. I know what my housing costs are like forever. I'm able to pay, I'm
Mm.
paying out, like I just paid off a small student loan this week. Like I'm able to do some stuff that 5 years ago, I literally could not have imagined. Like my brain couldn't, because
Yeah.
again, I grew up poor and I was just like, this is not a thing that's ever going to happen for me. And it took someone else, like coming in and helping me with a lot of these things.
Hmm. And when that, it's psychological safety, does that feel right? When that
Oh my God. Yeah.
psychological,
It's so
okay.
different. Yeah.
Yeah, all of a sudden you can expand more, you could be more creative, your brain, I shouldn't make assumptions, I would feel this way, and I think this is why I'm still living with my soon to be ex for 5 or 7 years, how long we've been doing this, because the psychological safety for me is more important than really anything. Like if I do not feel safe, I cannot create, I cannot produce,
Yep.
I cannot concentrate, I cannot sleep. And so everyone makes their, choices, but for me as an AuDHD person, the safety aspect is the main thing that
Yeah.
regulates me and allows me to function at
Yeah.
all.
And I could feel it like when, I mean, the affordable housing was a big jump up in psychological
Mhm.
safety. And when we bought the house, I literally, my baseline anxiety dropped by 25%. I could feel it. It was just
Wow.
this like, not that that's the path for everyone, but
Right, right.
it knowing, because I was moving for a good chunk of my 20s, basically, I was moving every 6 to 12 months because of finances.
Yeah.
So I just had this constant upheaval,
Yeah.
and knowing that that's not going to happen and I can just stay here as long as I want, assuming that the relationship goes well. Like, but even that, like, that was one of the things we talked about was we were like, what are we going to do if shit
Sure.
goes south and this ends up not working out? Like, what are we actually going to do around this? Yeah. So,
I bet you prioritize your relationship health.
mhm. I do. I sure do. Yeah.
Let's both of us stay together, please. Yes, yes. Oh my goodness. And that makes me think about when we talk about psychological safety, that makes me think about trauma. And one of the interesting things I read in your bio is that when you were diagnosed with autism, that you no longer met the criteria for PTSD. I'm
Yeah.
fascinated.
Yeah. And
That
those
P-
weren't like, that wasn't causal. It was just, so happened that they were also looking at PTSD and they were like, you don't meet the diagnostic
oh,
criteria anymore. Like it,
okay.
like looking at the questions in the questionnaires or whatever. Yeah, I still have CPTSD, and it does change your brain, right? And CPTSD and ADHD have a lot in common.
Mm-hmm.
So right there, and that was one of the things when I did my first round of neuropsych testing, which was just for ADHD. They basically were like, well, because of the CPTSD and because that's so present for you, that was in I think 2017. They were like, it's hard to piece this apart, because they look so similar. But basically, as your PTSD gets better, if it does, you'll notice either the ADHD symptoms will go away, which means you didn't have ADHD, or if they don't, then you do. And that's what happened is as my PTSD got better, the ADHD is still existing. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that was part of that. But the PTSD thing was so interesting because I had been, let's see, I think I was about a year and a half in at that point to really doing somatic stuff, like having all of my therapeutic work be somatically focused. I did still have a therapist that was doing talk therapy, but she was also neurodivergent and queer. And so she also like I was sort of processing with her some of the other somatic work that I was doing with someone else. So it was this really like I had a bunch of support, and the somatic stuff, like I had a period of about 3 years, I think, where every time I did yoga, I just cried like the whole time. So there was just so much in my body that was just coming out. And then as an autistic person, I had, gotten really good at dissociating and not being in my body because it's super intense to have all of those sensations all the time. And especially when you have a brain that's just like, and that's just one of the voices, right? Like there's a lot going on
Many in there.
there
Yes, yes.
all the time. And so I think for me, it was a really tough journey to get into the body and like feel a lot of that pain.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not something I recommend doing alone if you have a lot of
Mm-hmm.
trauma. Like I was having stuff come up in somatic processing that I have no memory of. But then I would have just this really strong body memory of like a really specific abuse. And I would just be like, oh, well, that probably happened. Like, I believe that that happened, but I have no memory of that. I don't remember a lot of my childhood. So there's like big missing pieces. And at the same time, then when I do the somatic stuff, that's when it comes up. And I'm not trying to, or was not trying to intellectually process all of that. I was like, let's just work with the body and whatever comes up, comes up. And I can just let that be what it is. I don't have to explain it. I don't have to go back to so and so in my life and be like, did you do this thing? Like, I don't need to intellectually process all of that. But the body processing was honestly brutal. It was really, really, really rough. But after about a year and a half of that, so I was like doing all this body processing. And then when I did the autism testing, and then they, with the results, they kind of said, oh, and by the way, you like no longer meet the diagnostic criteria for PTSD. And I was like, wow, I did not know that was possible. Like that's not what I was trying to do in all of the
Right.
therapizing, but
Right.
it it goes back to the psychological safety thing. Like I
Sure.
have a baseline level of safety
Yes.
at this point, and it includes safety with myself. Like I attack myself so much less, and
Yes.
my like I'm not hyper vigilant internally anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's a very interesting experience because I remember what it felt like to be having, panic attacks and meltdowns all the time.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And that
And
just
it's
mostly doesn't happen anymore unless I really push myself.
yeah, I do not find talk therapy or CBT, different therapies and modalities to be useful for trauma. I think you're spot on, with the somatic healing and you do hypnotherapy.
Mhm.
My therapist right now is working with me on sensate focus, and whoa, is that the hardest thing I've ever done. I mean, it just feels like it should be natural and innate. It's so challenging as an autistic person
Yeah.
to delve into sensate focus. And I want to, and I value it, but boy, am I resistant. Like, talk about PDA, all my PDA comes out.
Yeah.
Like, don't tell me to find pleasure. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really, really challenging.
Yeah.
And just I think we're wrapping it up here just due to time, but is there anything related to hypnotherapy or somatic healing tools specific to those that somebody could, like, a tangible thing somebody could take away who's listening to this podcast?
Oh, good question. One modality that I think for most people feels really safe to do on their own, meaning like you don't need to go find a practitioner, you can just look up YouTube videos, is tapping or emotional freedom technique, EFT, because you can't do it wrong, right? The
Hmm.
physical tapping part of it is nervous system regulating. So you're kind of tapping around different, they're mostly near like blood, what it's like blood pressure points or something. What do you
Meridians?
call that? Right. Well, that's where
Mhm.
they're placed. But like for example, like the wrists or like the
Yeah.
collarbone, like there's places where basically blood vessels are close to that, and so it's
Hmm.
regulating to the nervous system, and then it's also kind of stimmy. You're doing a little stim, right?
Yes.
And there's ones where like there's you tap points in the body, but then you can also just do like sides of the fingers, like this, which I do while walking all the time. So this is just a go-to stim for me. And then you can also add on to that either listening to a recording of someone walking you through an EFT script, because there's a bajillion of them out there for free, or you can find a kind of a style of it that you like and then do it yourself. So basically that one I don't see people, and then if you try it and you hate it, don't do it, right? That's the other thing I say is like try stuff. There's a bunch of stuff out there for free, and go look up if you hear somebody say, oh, this modality was great for me, go look up a YouTube video, because almost everything is available in some form for free. Try it a little bit, and if it feels bad to you when you're on your own in a safe environment, you're not going to want to go pay a practitioner for it, right? That's not for you.
I so
And
agree.
so that's like my main piece of advice is like if you hear something and you feel drawn to it, go check it out for free. And then if you love it or it feels great and you're like, wow, I notice a difference, then go pay someone to do that thing. And then in terms of hypnotherapy and just sort of somatic stuff in general, what I say is anything body based, which I think hypnotherapy is, right? That's where it's a lot of what we're doing is just like what's coming up in the body. And then we do weird stuff with it. That's kind of, the main thing is if you're not comfortable in your body, if you don't have access to your body, right? So a lot of autistic people have low interoception. That's fine. That you could have low interoception and feel safe, but a lot of times that's not the case, right? It's like, okay, if you start delving into these big sensations, it feels bad. That's fine. That might mean that you want to do some lighter processing and or do it with a practitioner and or kind of focus on a little something that's a little bit more talky. So there
Yes.
still could be some body stuff involved, but you probably don't just want to dive into the absolute deep end. And titration is a word that we talk about a lot of just, doing a little bit and then a little bit more and keeping it in this safe feeling space. And I actually really do believe in the kind of staying in your uh, zone of comfort and not always trying to stretch beyond that on your own. Stretching when you have someone to co-regulate with you is very, very different than, oh, I'm just sitting here pushing myself because that's what I'm used to. Because neurodivergent people are used to pushing themselves constantly past our own comfort zones, past our bodies know. And that is what leads to burnout. It's what leads to, anxiety and like meltdowns and all these things. So I'm like, if you're doing stuff on your own, if you're looking for stuff to do on your own, that's awesome. There's a bajillion books and videos, and just like make sure it feels comfortable and safe enough.
Yeah.
And
Beautiful.
then if something's working for you, then great. Then go find, a practitioner or class or something and like get more into that.
Yeah. I think that's such beautiful, brilliant advice. Agreed. Agreed. I don't even have anything to add. It was just perfect. So thank you. And of course, people are going to be listening and they're going to be like, ooh, I want to go talk to Mattia. How can they reach you and find you?
Yeah. So if you just want to hear me say stuff, my my podcasts are really, I really put a lot into them. I really try to make them be kind of densely practical, and they're also
Mm-hmm.
quite personal, right? So I'm talking about my own experiences and some client experiences, and then really trying to make them practical. So AuDHD Flourishing just started; it's a few episodes in. I think it's very clear what that's about. And then the longer road is for people with multiple marginalized identities who feel behind in life, which I probably still do, but like especially in all of my 20s, I felt like I was behind relative to my peers
Yeah.
because my health was so bad and my mental health was so bad, and I was just trying to like survive and survive
Yeah.
capitalism and like be okay. And so I feel like I'm kind of just now at 35 kind of catching up to where a lot of my peers were 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That's what
Mm-hmm.
that's about.
Okay. And then on social media, you're something puffin. What is it again?
At AuDHD Flourishing on TikTok and Instagram. Yeah.
I thought you were something
I
puffin on
was, yeah, for a long
TikTok.
time I was puffling moo,
Oh, yes.
because pufflings are baby puffins and they make a little mooing noise and they're very cute. And then I was like, okay,
Oh,
I love this. And also no one knows what this is.
right, 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 right. Okay, so AuDHD flourishing.
Yeah.
That's easier to remember for
Yes.
sure. Okay, and of course, in all the show notes, if you're listening in your car, all this will be listed out so you can refer back to it. And if you want to reach me, you can go onto my website, pashamarlow.com. I'm on Facebook, Pasha Marlow, but on Instagram and TikTok, I'm at Neuroqueer Coach. So easy to reach. We love feedback. And if this episode resonated with you and you think it would help somebody, please share it. Of course, subscribing and reviewing is super helpful too. But we mostly hope that it brought some ease to your day. So thank you so much, Mattia, for joining us today.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. We'll talk soon, everybody. Bye.